Israel has gone through various wars, and I've spent a lot of time discussing the first Arab-Israeli war or the 1948 war, known by many names. Today, I want to talk about the 1967 war or the Six-Day War. And so I'm going to start by telling you that a lot of times what you're going to hear is that as a result of the Six-Day War, Israel gained so much territory, it grew 3 times in size, right? Its size. One of my students once told me that in a classroom, his professor told the class that we know that Israel, now this is the professor talking, we know that Israel is an aggressor. Take a look at what they did after the Six-Day War. They amassed so much territory. They took over the entire Sinai Peninsula. They took over Gaza. They took over the Golan Heights. They took over Judea, Samaria, or the West Bank. And the student was very angry, and rightfully so, because in that narrative, that type of presentation of the war, what this professor, whether intentionally or out of ignorance, completely did not explain was that Israel did not start the 1967 war. Israel has never started any of the wars that it's been waging. That's really important to underscore here. So how did the war of 1967 even begin? Well, it began with something known as a casus belli, which is Latin for cause for violence. Now, what Egypt did under President Nasser is that Egypt closed a very important port. The port was known as the Straits of Tiran. And the international community, the United Nations, actually said that if any country closes that port, it is a declaration, according to international law, that is a declaration of war. So here's Israel on the eve of the Six-Day War, and they get word that Egypt closes the Straits of Tiran, which according to international law is an invocation. It's a declaration of war. It's a casus belli. So here you are, you're Israel. It's an actual declaration of war. The second thing that Egypt does is they move their troops into the Sinai Peninsula, right coming close to Israel's borders. How were they able to do that, Egypt? Well, who was securing those borders? Who was making sure there would be no war? The United Nations. Now, you're probably scratching your head. Well, then how was Egypt able to move their troops to the border? Well, they were able to do that because they told the United Nations to leave, and the United Nations left. I know you're still scratching your head over that one. So United Nations leave, basically abandoning their post to keep order. And so here's Israel on the eve of war. From one side, they get a declaration of war with the closing of the Straits of Tiran. And on the other side, they get the troops moving, basically preparing for a physical, violent assault against Israel. So yes, Israel does deal the first quote-unquote blow, but it's a reaction in response to the casus belli. So that's very important when you're talking about the Six-Day War, right? The Six-Day War was not started by Israel. Yes, Israel did, in terms of, who punched whom first, Israel did deliver the first punch, but it was because somebody, i.e. Egypt, basically declared war by closing the Straits of Tiran. And it was a really short war. It was a 6-day war. And yes, Israel won a lot of territory. But here's the thing, all very legally, right? Under the 4th Geneva Convention, which was installed by the international community, by the United Nations, if you are fighting a war, and the war that you are fighting is defensive in nature, and Israel was fighting a defensive war in 1967, the area that you win as a result of fighting that war you get to decide what to do with that land. So what does Israel decide to do? Israel decides to annex, so basically take in the Sinai Peninsula, which includes Gaza. They take the Golan Heights, or about 2/3 of the Golan Heights. But the interesting thing is that Israel decided to put Judea, Samaria, or the West Bank under a military occupation. And if you ask me, I think it was a huge mistake that they did that. But, we can't go back in history and change what Israel did. So once again, right, we started with that professor who says, look, you could tell that Israel is the aggressor by looking at the map of Israel after 1967. Wow, look at them, all they want to grow in power. They want to grow in land. Israel fought a defensive war, and remember that Geneva Convention, the 4th Convention, was fighting a defensive war, so legally took the land. Here's the other interesting fact that you should all know about the aftermath of the Six-Day War. So after the Arabs lost, yet again, they felt very humiliated and ashamed. So they met, the Arab League goes to Sudan, to the city of Khartoum, and they have a conference there. The conference is known as the Khartoum Conference, and it was in 1967. And what did they do? At the Khartoum Conference, they issued what is famously known as the 3 no's. What were those 3 no's? No to peace with Israel, no to negotiations with Israel, no to recognition of Israel. Right? And so think about that for just a second. You are Israel, and you are nestled in this region with Arab countries all around you. And what did they say basically after they lost the war? We're not going to recognize you. Okay? We're not even going to recognize you. We're never going to negotiate with you, even if it's for the good of our own people. And we're not going to seek peace. I mean, that's a pretty big signal that you're sending to Israel. So, everyone says the conflict, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, the Arab-Israeli conflict, and they put all this responsibility on Israel to solve this conflict when Israel is surrounded by Arab neighbors in 1967 that had no interest in pursuing peace. So they issued these 3 no's. That's really important in kind of understanding the Arab mindset after the Six-Day War. Despite that mindset, in 1978, Israel returns the entire Sinai Peninsula to Egypt, okay, for peace. Now, this is huge because Egypt was one of the biggest players in terms of the Arab-Israeli conflict from the genesis of 1948, launching the first Arab-Israeli war, 1956. The Sinai War was also prompted by Egypt, in 1967, yet again. And 1973, the Yom Kippur War, again, Egypt is a major player. And in 1978, despite that Israel wants so much to pursue peace, remember, despite those 3 no's, Israel continues to pursue peace, right? So in 1978, under the leadership of Likud Prime Minister Menachem Begin, who, by the way, is a quote-unquote right-wing, what we would call very much in America, a right-wing leader. The Likud party is kind of the equivalent probably of the conservatives, of the Republicans, the United States of America, pursues peace with Egypt and gives back the entire Sinai Peninsula. And by the way, they offered Gaza. Egypt did not want Gaza. They didn't want it, right? They offered it all back for peace. And I don't know personally of any other country in the entire world and in human history where one country wins territory in a defensive war and then returns it. I really don't. This speaks volumes, I think, about Israel and understanding the mindset of the Israelis, right? We have to understand the mindset of the Arabs. We have to understand the mindset of the Israelis. The Arab mindset, as revealed by the Khartoum Conference, as revealed by the ongoing wars that they are waging against Israel circa 1948, reveals that they have no interest in pursuing peace, and Israel is. So I just wanted to set that record straight about the Six-Day War and the kind of the intentional misinformation that many people put out there when they say, oh, you see, Israel is the aggressor. Israel basically dealt the first blow in 1967 and took over 3 times its landmass. Israel, the big bad wolf. And of course, they leave out that Israel didn't start the war, that Egypt enacted a casus belli and declared a war, that Egypt sent its troops very much preparing to attack Israel, that the UN absconded its position, thereby, leaving Israel completely wide open for attack, and finally that Israel returns huge land in 1978 for peace. Thank you very much.